Shipleys FM, Episode 4, What to Think About at the End of the Year.
You're listening to Shipleys FM from the accountancy firm Shipleys LLP. In each episode, you'll hear accounting and tax-saving insights to improve business and personal finances. Now, here's your host, tax specialist Dean Hardy.
Hello everybody, welcome to episode 4 of the Shipleys FM podcast. Today we've got some tax saving ideas if you're in business. So our main topic today is what to consider in terms of tax saving and accounting tips towards the end of your financial year and the end of the tax year. We've got a hot topic on company cars and tax efficient company cars, some changes there. We've got a fantastic sort of client contact interview with Martin Bamford and how he moved away from his life as a financial planner into his business as a media agency and does a great job of helping us with this podcast. And we've got a sort of staff profile with my colleague Andrew Taylor, who is part of the Shipleys audit team. I hope you enjoy.
We're talking about the year end, and it doesn't feel like it's the end of the year, but for lots of people, including my business, and I know Michelle's business, our year end is coming up. So tell us a bit about year ends. I mean, they're all times of year, aren't they?
Yeah. So I suppose we've sort of got two things in mind when we say year end. We've got the tax year end, 5th of April, and then we've got your business's year end, so your company's year end or your sole trade's year end, and maybe things to think about as you're approaching that, because worth bearing in mind from a tax treatment, you're taxed on, in any given tax year, you're taxed on the accounting period that ends in that year. But you're not necessarily paying tax on your profits from April to April. If your year end is June, your profit for the accounting year end June 17 will be what you pay tax on, what you report on your 2017-18 tax return and pay your tax on, and moving forward similarly. So you're not necessarily always thinking April to April.
So you can pick whatever year end you want as a business or as a sole trader?
You can.
Are you stuck with what you set out, or is it a movable thing?
No, you can move it. You're restricted to moving it once every 5 years unless you have a commercial reason to do so. So if you were changing it every year, you'd get some sort of challenge from HMRC because, of course, in theory, you could change it every year and move your year-end date further and further and never pay the tax. So you'll get some challenge. But if you do change it, as long as you're not doing it too frequently, you absolutely can change it. You can shorten your year, you can lengthen your year. And the thing to bear in mind is you might find yourself with a long period of accounts in a given tax return and a bumper tax bill.
Is there an ideal company year end then? I know lots of companies we see do it around end of March, lots do it end of July as well.
Yeah.
Is one better than the other for any reason?
Not really. It depends. See, there's two things. In a company, it doesn't make much difference at all. You're going to pay your tax 9 months and 1 day after the end of your accounting period. Full stop, regardless. So from a company, you're really thinking about actually what works best for your business in terms of your year end. As a sole trader, you'd probably look ideally to set a year end of 30th of April, which is what you see a lot of businesses doing, because like we said earlier, you will pay tax in any given tax year on the accounts period that ends in that year. If you set your date to 5th of April, which is kind of the default that most people go for, end of the tax year, your year ending 5th of April 2018, you will report on your 2017-18 tax return. If you delay your year end by 25 days and make your year end 30th of April, you report that on your 2018-19 tax return and you buy yourself another year to pay the tax. So essentially, if your year end date is 30th of April, you're giving yourself the longest period possible between the end of your accounting year and the point at which you can maybe quantify your profit and therefore your tax, and the point at which you have to pay that tax. I suppose the only thing to bear in mind is then you are a long way behind your tax payments. You see some people getting confused about why is my tax... Your accounting period to April 18, 30th of April 18, you're paying your tax at 31st of January 2020 as a balancing payment. And sometimes we see people coming along saying, why am I paying so much in January 20? My profits for the year to April 19 were low. That's not the year we're looking at. We're a long way behind. So there's advantages and disadvantages to that.
Are there sort of other things we should be bearing in mind in the run-up to our year end to be more tax efficient, or I don't know, is there any incentives that we could be making the most of if we get the timing right?
Yeah, a few things to bear in mind. I mean, we've probably all heard of capital allowances. If you go out and buy some equipment, machinery, cars, vans, all that sort of stuff, you can claim what's called capital allowances, which is essentially HMRC approved depreciation. In your accounts, you can set your depreciation at whatever you like, really. And obviously HMRC are aware of the fact that given free rein, everybody would say everything depreciates at 100% and I claim all of everything in year one. They don't like that, so there are approved rates of capital allowances, sort of 18% as the main rate on a decreasing balance basis. All that aside, the first £200,000 is an annual investment allowance, which is set at £200,000. So the first £200,000, aside from cars, you can claim 100% deduction, fully tax relieved in the year. You can't carry forward your £200,000. So always worth bearing in mind at your year end, am I needing any machinery? Sometimes you see people, you would hate to say, I don't know, you spent £100,000 on plant and machinery, and you've got £100,000 of your annual investment allowance available, and you don't use it, and then in the first week of your next accounting period, you think, we need some new software and some new computers, and you're going to spend 300 grand on that, and you're going to get 200 grand of that fully relieved, and then the rest is falling into 18% a year. So, you're looking at years before you get full tax relief on that, when actually if you just bridge the year a little bit, you could have had it used up all of your allowances for each year. So always worth bearing in mind that annual investment allowance you're getting towards the end of the year. It's a sizable sum, £200,000 for most businesses, and for most businesses it will encompass all of their expenditure on plant and machinery and equipment.
I guess the time to start having a conversation with your accountant isn't once the year end has happened.
No.
It's quite a way in advance, so you
Absolutely.
can plan ahead and be proactive.
Absolutely. Always try and be proactive, and we see a lot of people come along sort of after the event and say, I've done this, and you think, I wish you'd done that differently. And obviously it's too late by then. I would say for any business, at any point, if you're thinking about making a sizable expenditure on anything, worth running it by your advisor first. Because there might be some ideas, there might be a better way to do it, there might be a better way to time it.
Are you seeing with the change to the dividend tax that people are considering what dividends they're taking earlier on in the year? I guess some people left it to the last minute to see what sort of profit they were looking at.
Yeah.
How's that impacting?
No, I would love to say we're seeing more people think about it earlier, but I'm not entirely sure they are. I think real-time information has impacted that more probably than the dividend changes, in that from a pay-as-you-earn point of view, it kind of used to be the case that you could get to the end of the year, you'd see what your profit level was, and you'd say, we'll put 20 of that to salary, we'll put some of it to dividends, and we'll put some in the pension. And you can't really do that anymore, because with real-time information, you've got to report your salary and your payroll month by month. So you can't get to the end of the year and go, we'll allocate all that to salary. It's too late. So I think real-time information is actually making people think about how they're going to remunerate themselves a touch earlier in the year, more so than the dividend changes, I think.
And then also we've got to think about the personal year end, so 5th of April.
Mm-hmm.
What are the sort of considerations that people should be thinking about as they come up to that date in the diary?
I think pensions are the big one. So obviously a bit like the annual investment allowance, you've got a pension allowance each year. For most people, that'll be £40,000 a year currently. If your salary gets very high, so if your income for any given year is over 150, that £40,000 does get abated away. It can go down as low as 10. So, and again, you can utilise unused relief for earlier years, and that's where the big consideration is. So for any given year, you can put, say, £40,000 into your pension and claim the tax relief on that, and on top of that, you can use the £40,000 from any of the preceding 3 years, carry them forward. So as long as you had a pension plan in place at the time. So if you've got a plan, and for whatever reason, for the last 3 years, you've paid nothing in, you could pay, in theory, £160,000 in this year and get full tax relief on the lot. Bearing in mind the way that works, when I move over to next year, when I tick past 5th of April, that third year, the earliest one that I've not used, is going to fall away, because I can only use the last 3 years. So actually, sometimes what we might be thinking about doing is saying, look, I want to pay into my pension and I don't want to have any allowances unused. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay 80 now. I'm going to pay the 40 for this year, and I'm going to pay the 40 for that earliest year. I'm not necessarily going to pay the other 80. I'm going to let those tick forward, because I can still access those next year. But obviously this is the sort of thing that needs to be thought about before that year end ticks over. Also, bearing in mind, pension companies have an admin lead time, so you couldn't just decide on the 5th of April, I'm going to pay something into the pension today, because it probably won't get through in time.
So say we're getting to the end of the year, in terms of sort of looking at your accounts and how things are going, are there any other things you should be alert to with a view to the year end coming up?
Yeah, from a sort of just a business angle, really, unpaid debts are always worth a review nearing the end of your accounting period. If you've got specific bad debts, general bad debts just carry forward. If you've got a specific bad debt, i.e. a client that you know you're not going to get paid for, you can write that debt off and obtain the tax relief for the write-off. So if you're carrying bad debts, obviously everybody has a debtors list, sadly. What you can't do is look at your debtors list and say, well, every year 30% of my clients don't pay, so I'm going to write off 30%, because that's what I think. That's a general bad debt provision. What you can do is say, John isn't going to pay me because he's gone out of business, and write that debt off and obtain the tax relief.
And that's in your corporation tax, is it? The
corporation tax, or as a sole trader.
Okay.
So that's always worth a review near your year end, because obviously if you leave it 1 day, say past your year end, actually you're delaying by 12 months the point at which you can get the tax relief for the.
That's quite
for the bad debt. Yeah.
Challenge.
Also worth a review is just generally, really, but the sort of equalisation of income, certainly amongst families. So you see a lot of businesses are husband-wife owned, and it's always worth a review, not necessarily even at the end of the year, just in the year at some point, especially with the dividends slightly changing now. But do we want to review our share allocations? Is it worth moving away from just having two ordinary shares, one each, to actually maybe two classes, two pools of shares, and we can vote different dividends? You know, it might be that wife earns 60 grand a year and husband earns 10 grand a year, so we're better off voting dividends to husband, and equally, you know, just generally with things like bank interest and property income, do we want to think about moving that from one spouse to the other, or vice versa?
Brilliant.
Okay. Good stuff. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that advice.
Okay, a quick update to one of the things we mentioned in that section of the podcast. When we talked about expenditure on plant and machinery, I mentioned the term annual investment allowance, AIA, which is the allowance that gives a 100% write-off in the year of purchase for expenditure up to a certain level on certain things. Pretty much everything aside from cars. I mentioned in the talk there that it was set at £200,000 currently. This thing came in 2008, it's moved up and down all over the place. Originally it was £50,000, then it went, I think, to £100,000, dropped down to £25,000, went up to £250,000, then £500,000. In January 2016, they changed the rules and set it permanently, in inverted commas, at £200,000. Now, I wanted to mention that since we recorded the episodes for Series 1 of the podcast, they've actually now since introduced that this is going to be, the annual investment allowance is now £1 million for expenditure covering the period January 2019 to end of 2020. So 1st of January 19 to 31st of December 20. After that, it's due to revert back to £200,000. So be aware of that. Keep your eye on it. And yep, just an update on that. Thank you. So this is a part of the podcast where I normally do a client or a contact profile. Today we've got a client and contact profile, and I'm sat here in his fabulous office / recording studio with Martin Bamford.
Hi, Dean.
Martin, we'll start with Martin has been expertly helping along with the podcasts. Should we start a bit at the beginning? Obviously, you're involved in Informed Choice as well. I say involved, are joint owner of.
Yes, yeah. So I mean that was my original career. So starting as a financial planner when I came out of university. So back in 2000. Okay. Came out of university with a business degree, and I guess inevitably fell into the family business, as you do if your parents are both financial planners. There was no escape and no other choice for me. So
which uni?
Winchester. So well, I say Winchester. So what happened was I'm fair to say I was academically challenged. Yeah. So didn't do very well at college with A levels and things. Didn't get off to university at that point because I didn't get the grades to do so, but went off to a local college, studied business and finance for an HND, Higher National Diploma. Yeah. And I think that shift from quite dry academic theoretical stuff through to more practical hands-on ignited a bit of a spark within me. Yeah, okay. And I realised I can do this. And I ended up going off to university for a year afterwards in Winchester, topping it up for a business degree. Gotcha. And then off into the real world and got some work after that.
Why Winchester? Was it just to escape from mum and dad? Or it
was close enough to come and bring my washing home at the weekend, but far enough away to have a bit of freedom.
I took a similar approach.
Yeah.
Okay, so business degree at Winchester. And then you come out and watch straight into the family business?
No, so I sort of felt it was important not to go straight into the family business, to get some real world experience first and a different perspective, I guess. So I spent 2 years working as an account manager for insurance companies. Okay. So first of all, MPI, who sadly no longer exist. Nothing to do with me. I was going to say. And then secondly, Standard Life. Okay. So two quite big insurance companies. And my job was to look after a panel of advisors. So to go around, drive around the southeast of the country in my Flash Company car, take them out for lunches, play golf with them.
Sounds
and
awful.
it was a terrible job for 2 years. As a 21-year-old straight out of university, awful job. But to effectively, account management, to raise business and win business from them. And you get lots of experience. I sat my first set of exams, financial planning exams, whilst I was with those companies.
Fantastic.
So got lots of training and support at the same time, then felt ready to move off from the corporate world into the family business.
So well and truly sort of out in amongst the clients and meeting people and learning how to sort of deal with people.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, and a real range of people too. And I was looking after advisors who were sort of South London based, whose clientele were shopkeepers, through to advisors who were in sort of posh, leafy parts of Surrey who were dealing with multimillionaires. So there's a really good range. It was a great grounding actually.
It's quite a decent sort of training ground, isn't it? If you are chucked in amongst that, whereas versus sort of sitting in a room academically learning the nuts and bolts of it, the sort of client relation side of it, contact relation side of it. I think
so. Yeah.
And so after was Standard Life and then Informed Choice?
Standard Life to Informed Choice, yeah. And so joined as a trainee financial planner. Right. Became authorised through the Financial Services Authority as they were back then. And had a bit of a mixed role for a few years. So doing things like research and report writing, but also starting to look after large employers. So I was looking after retail distribution employers in the Midlands, in Liverpool. So again, travelling quite a bit, signing people up to group pension schemes, meeting a really good range of people. Yeah. All the time developing my own individual clients at the same time and sort of building my experience as I went.
Okay. And why don't you tell us a bit about Informed Choices of Family? Because it is well and truly a family business, isn't it? In Cranley, lovely little place. But it's sort of a small firm with quite a large reach, isn't it?
It is now, yeah. And when I joined, so it started in 1994, so we're 25 years old this year. Started by my parents, Nick and Andy, and originally reasonly small firm, so a handful of financial advisors with a few administrators supporting them. And over the years, we've grown gradually. We've always viewed ourselves as a small business with quite a big profile. Yeah. So we've always had a big profile in the national press, TV and radio, and that sort of thing. And last year opened a second office. So we've opened an office in Petersfield. So as well as our head office in Cranley, we have a satellite office over in Petersfield, and we're now 15 people strong. So it's a business that's grown over the years. Yeah.
How was the Petersfield office doing? I went down to visit Shelley, who was, I think, at the time looking for someone to come in and join her there. Yeah.
So there's 3 people who work out of Petersfield now. So Shelley, another director, Phil, and one of our associate financial planners, Victoria. Okay. It's a lovely location. It's a refurbished barn office nice. You would have seen, and sort of tucked away on just off the station road. But
just around the corner from the pubs. Perfect.
Well, I think that may have been a factor in its location choice. But Petersfield for us was a strategic location to move into. Shelley lives there, so she'd been nagging us for years to have an office close to her house so she could just rock out of bed and go straight into work. But Petersfield has got a very similar characteristics to Cranley, so it's a market town, similar sized population. We already had a number of clients and professional contacts in that area, and given Shelley lives there, our other directors down in Chichester, our associate that works out of there is in Borden, so geographically it's close enough to Cranley to make it sensible, but it's far enough away to capture and exploit a different market. So,
well, like you say, presumably you can cover sort of all of Petersfield. There's a lot of people around there, Petersfield, Clanfield, Portsmouth, presumably reaching out to there and all
I mean, really, it's our move into Hampshire, effectively. Cranley is a great base for Surrey and West Sussex, but Petersfield for Hampshire makes a lot of sense.
Perfect. So you're working with Informed Choice, and I know because I've listened to it and seen it, obviously you started to get involved in the social media side of things. Informed Choice Radio started to grow. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a fairly early adopter of technology and innovation when it comes to marketing and things. So we were one of the earliest financial planners to start blogging on our website. I've always done that stuff in-house myself. So I've taught myself how to code, how to build websites, that sort of thing. And then back in, I want to say about 2007-ish, I started a podcast at Informed Choice, and this was before anyone was podcasting apart from the BBC, so it was very, very early days. Didn't last for very long because nobody knew what a podcast was back then, and it was very hard work to actually sort of manually code it all and make it all work. But then 4 or 5 years ago, we decided to get back into it because podcasting had I guess reached a new height of popularity. We had big podcasts out there like Serial, the BBC really making a push into it, and people knew what podcasting was then.
Yeah.
So I started producing a couple of episodes a week. One of them was an interview with a personal finance expert or an author. The other was just me rambling about something topical around personal finance. And to date, I've now recorded 447 episodes. So it's amazing how quickly it racks up when you do it each week.
Quite a following, haven't you?
Just a bit, yeah. And each year we probably get over 100,000 downloads on the podcast.
Yeah,
I've got I guess what I call a tribe. So each time I publish an episode, I get emails now from listeners, regular listeners.
Fantastic.
Which is lovely. And then that sort of, I guess, goes through into our social media following on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and things. So it's been a great experience.
So, and do you want to have a chance to drop some of those? You've had some quite big names on it, haven't you?
One or two, yeah. I mean, probably the scariest interview for me was interviewing Nick Hewer from The Apprentice and Countdown, and he obviously comes across on TV as having this very grumpy persona. He's actually a lovely chap.
Did you pitch? Or?
Well, no, I didn't get a chance to. Sadly, it was one of those calls where he was in a studio and just doing back-to-back interviews about fraud prevention for the Financial Conduct Authority.
Okay.
But sometimes, despite having done so many of these and speaking to some quite high-profile people, I still get quite nervous.
I bet,
people like him. But I've had some great conversations. I interviewed Sir Vince Cable a while back. He wasn't the happy, friendly, jolly chap I thought he'd be, actually. He was slightly grumpy that day.
That's odd.
But that was still a fairly nerve-wracking experience, sat in a room with Sir Vince and talking to him about Brexit and things.
Fantastic.
But it's been a good experience.
Okay. And what's so if people who are listening now want to go and have a listen to that, how will they find that?
Yeah, I mean, search for Informed Choice Radio in your favourite podcast player, or the website's icradio.co.uk.
Perfect. So you're a massive success with Informed Choices Radio and podcasting and blogging and all that kind of stuff. So you decide, I'm going to go and I'm going to teach Dean and others and facilitate other people becoming a success as well.
Essentially,
So you've got a second business.
What was happening was we were doing all this stuff like podcasting and blogging. I was writing books. I produced a documentary. So all this sort of innovative marketing activity. And other financial planning firms were looking at what we were doing and saying, well, we wanted to do that, so can you do it for us? And I didn't really have a vehicle for doing that. Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I set up a second business, which is where we're sitting right now, Bamford Media.
Yeah, very professional.
Thank you. We're a creative agency, a digital marketing agency, and our main passion is podcast production. So we're now producing podcasts for 6 different firms. But we build websites, we write blog content, we do all sorts of digital marketing for people within the financial services profession, but also other businesses as well. So our biggest client is the Chartered Insurance Institute.
Oh, really?
We produce their podcast for them, which is great fun. But I work with business consultants. I work with a human factors training company, which is a fascinating stuff. So he effectively goes into healthcare settings, into surgeries, operating theatres, and helps them avoid making human mistakes.
Right.
And his background is aviation. So if you've read the book Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed, it's that sort of theory. So checklists, making sure we're conscious of the mistakes we're making. So anything to do with sort of behavioural science and human behaviour, I'm fascinated by anyway. It's just been great working with that company to sort of understand how they approach it.
Fantastic. And you're going great. And I mean, you mentioned passionate. People drop the word passionate in, but you are passionate about this. You clearly enjoy it. And what's the plan? Just to sort of grow and grow and grow as big as you can be.
I've got no ambition to be too big. I think challenges in business always come with growth.
Yeah.
I want to be a bit bigger than where we are today. So currently there's 3 of us. I've got my 4th person joining me next month. It'd be nice to have a few more people doing the work so I can focus on the bits I really love, which is the sort of the self-promotion stuff, the marketing stuff, the strategy. And I don't see us ever becoming sort of 50 or 100 people, but it'd be nice to sort of have 8 or 10 of us here.
Good stuff.
And it's fantastic to see Shipleys embracing podcasting. I think you're probably the first firm of accountants to get into this medium.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people see tax and business finance and things as a fairly dry subject. But podcasting is just such a great way to communicate these subjects. And I know you're enjoying it.
I am enjoying it, albeit a bit nerve-wracking at times. But I sort of there aren't many firms in the UK that do it. Certainly not on a regular basis, as far as I could see. So you get some of the bigger firms who will use podcasts here and there, but pretty sporadic. In the US, it seems to be a bigger thing, but in this country, not much. So hopefully we're pioneering.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Martin. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dean. So what company car should we buy? What's the most efficient company car out there?
I'm not sure about the make and model, and this is a big subject to be honest, but we'll cover it in a couple of minutes. In that, essentially, the lower the CO2 emissions, the cheaper the company car benefit is going to be. So we're looking at electric cars being the most efficient, and then cars with lower CO2 emissions. So you're talking about 50 grams per kilometre or less will hit you with a charge of 16% for a petrol engine, always 4% more for a diesel engine, and then there's a sliding scale will move you up all the way to 37% if you're driving a big gas guzzling monster. A good option that we're sort of seeing a lot of people moving into these days are actually thinking about like commercial vehicles, which are classed for tax as vans, and there is sort of a set benefit for a van, normally around $3,500. Obviously it changes every year, but you're looking at about $3,500. So paying tax on that at 20 or 40% is obviously far less than paying tax on a company car. So we're seeing, some people moving towards these big Rextons or pickup trucks or something like that you could use as a vehicle as well. Might be a slightly better option. Interesting conversation while we're at it is I had with a conversation with a client a little while ago on pool cars. So be careful with pool cars. People often sort of have a pool car for the business that people tend to use for business, and I think that's entirely exempt from tax. HMRC tend to define a pool car not necessarily so much in that it's shared. You could have a shared company car, but more about where it resides overnight. So sometimes you see businesses falling into a bit of a trap that they think they've got a pool car, but someone's taking it home every night and it is available for their use. So actually what you've got is a shared company car and potentially some tax to pay on that. There are ways around that. Maybe you insure it that they can't use it for personal use, or you write it into the contract or something like that. But it's worth being aware of. To be perfectly honest with you, a lot of businesses these days, especially we're talking about family-owned smaller businesses, running a company car just doesn't make any sense. You're better off taking a dividend out and using that to fund the car, and that the car you're going to pay income tax at 20 or 40 or 45%, whereas you could take a dividend out of say 7.5% and use the net sum to pay for the car. Most of the time is a more tax efficient way to do that. So from an employee's perspective, whether the employer leases or buys the car, tax treatment will be exactly the same. Again, sort of thinking about family-owned companies from the employer's point of view, bearing in mind it's all the same pot of money, the tax treatment might be slightly different in that the purchase of a car will obtain capital allowances and get a deduction for the company from their corporation tax or from their income tax if it's a non-limited employer, whereas the lease is just a deduction from profit. And today I have with me for our staff profile my esteemed colleague Andrew Taylor. Hello, Andrew.
Hello.
Andrew is, what are you?
I'm an audit supervisor.
Audit supervisor.
No, yeah.
And you work in sort of specifically on audits? Or do you get involved in some of the accounts prep and the bookkeeping as well?
Occasionally, I get involved in a bit of accounts prep,
Okay.
bit of corporation tax preparation,
Yeah.
and a bit of everything else in between, really.
So, what does an audit supervisor role entail? You're obviously out on site a lot.
Yep, on site with clients a lot of the time, supervising other members of staff who are out on audit, ensuring that the work they've done is a reasonable standard, really, and that they're picking up any issues that should be picked up.
And just for the sort of layman, myself included, non-accounts type people who might be listening, audit work is?
Audit work is basically looking at client files and ensuring that all the evidence in relation to those items are up to date and everything is in place, really, and that they've complied with laws and regulations, really.
Okay, sounds interesting.
Wow, it can be.
You enjoy it?
I do, yeah.
It's a lot of client contact, isn't it?
It is. It's a lot of client contact.
Yeah. And how did you find yourself? You've got quite an interesting history with Shipleys, haven't you? And that you were here, then you were not here, then you were here again.
I have, yes. Yeah, I was originally here in about 2016.
Yeah.
And I stuck around 2015. Stuck around for probably about a year and a half.
Yeah.
Went off to a couple of other practices and decided that maybe Shipleys was
not so bad after all.
Not so bad after all.
What about sort of pre-Shipleys? Was it always your dream as a little boy to be an auditor?
I wouldn't say from a little boy. Maybe from about
farmer or auditor.
Yeah, pretty much.
How did you find yourself kind of stumbling into accounts and that sort of world?
Well, I've always had an interest in numbers, really. So from when I was at school, really.
Yeah.
And then I decided that accounting was probably for the thing I wanted to go into. So went into accounting and then sort of specialised in auditing. Really.
Yeah. And what about outside of work? You've got a young family, haven't you?
I have, yes. I've got two young children who certainly keep me on my toes.
Take up most of your time.
Yeah, not much time for anything else at all, really.
Sounds remarkably similar to my life. You got any hobbies apart from the kids?
I like to spend some time in the garden.
Yep.
I've grown some vegetables. This year, not very successful. Not had much at all, but when it does work out, it's normally good.
Quite relaxing.
Yeah, very relaxing.
Good man. Thanks, Andrew, for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, that wraps up episode 4 of Shipleys FM. Thank you to everybody for listening. Really appreciate that. We can see the people that are listening are growing, and that's fantastic. Please do share it with anyone and everyone who you think might be interested, and hopefully you're taking some interesting tax saving and accounting tips from these podcasts. Hopefully something interesting in today's as well. Leave any reviews or any ideas for future episodes, as I usually say, sort of in the normal places where you might get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify and so on, or on our website. And happy to take any comments also on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter and so on. Thank you very much and look forward to hearing you next time.
Thank you for listening to Shipleys FM. Visit shipleys.com/listen to find out more and to subscribe to the show in your favourite podcast player. Tune in next time to hear more accounting and tax-saving insights from Shipleys LLP and our guests, all designed to improve your business and personal finances.